construction, smells of corruption. I manipulates to recreate. This air to go around saga. Gotta launder my karma. Gotta launder my karma.
Greetings world, we are anonymous. It seems because there are so many fronts where evil must be fought against that we have lost focus on one of the biggest threats that humanity is facing, which is the United Nations. Make no mistake, the United Nations is the world government, Agenda 21 is the agenda into the New World Order, and major depopulation is a big part of this agenda. We have plenty of evidence from their big globalist meetings, like from the Royal Institute of International Affairs, going back even as far as 1938, where they are very openly planning for world government. And at this very moment, the only thing standing in the way of the UN of becoming a true world government, is to get rid of the Security Council's right to veto. Like when the League of Nations transformed into the United Nations, it will most likely then transform into the multipolar New World Order they have been planning for decades. We also have plenty of evidence showing how eugenics, an old elitist movement that believes the elite's genes are superior and that the genes of the working class should be heavily reduced, is behind the UN's depopulation plans that we all know today. This is clearly shown and stated by the people who were the architects of this agenda. People like Julian Huxley, who was president of the British Eugenics Society, who also created the UN's UNESCO and made it clear UNESCO would be used to further their eugenics program. And people like Bertrand Russell and H.G. Wells, who were also very clear about calling out the working class. Nothing has changed, except the name from eugenics to depopulation. And whether you believe if CO2 causes climate change or not, we have plenty of evidence that the elite has planned on using climate change to further their totalitarian agenda, and that the same people running the oil industry are the ones who created these organizations of the United Nations, supposedly fighting oil companies. The most obvious example of this is Maurice Strong, the godfather of the modern-day environmental movement, who is a Rockefeller-backed multi-millionaire that got rich in the oil industry. Rockefeller himself, who even donated the UN's headquarters, has been a part of this agenda from the very start. Hegelian dialectics at its finest. Destroy the world with capitalism so you can enslave it with socialism. And that's not to mention all the numerous scandals the United Nations has been involved in, including sex scandals. In order to bring back the much-needed awareness about the United Nations, and to interfere with their agendas as much as possible, we have launched Stop the UN. The following list contains all the UN's organizations that we will be targeting. Calling all activists, and other freedom fighters to join us in this operation. And to the United Nations, we refuse to bow down to your New World Order, your world government and your depopulation agendas. Expect us.
To understand how this came about, we have to examine the history of the emergence of the environmental movement. In the post-war period, the desire to control the population put on a new mask, protecting the world from resource depletion, pollution, and ecological catastrophe, and facilitating the transition from eugenics to population control to environmentalism was Julian Huxley, brother of Brave New World author Aldous Huxley, and grandson of Darwin's bulldog T.H. Huxley. Julian Huxley was a committed eugenicist, chairing the British Eugenics Society from 1959 to 1962. But, like the other eugenicists of the post-war era, he understood the need to pursue the now discredited work of eugenics under a different guise. The founding director of the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, Huxley wrote in the agency's founding document about the need to find ways to make the cause of eugenics politically viable once again. At the moment, it is probable that the indirect effect of civilization is dysgenic instead of eugenic, and in any case it seems likely that the dead weight of genetic stupidity, physical weakness, mental instability, and disease proneness, which already exist in the human species, will prove too great a burden for real progress to be achieved. Thus, even though it is quite true that any radical eugenic policy will be for many years politically and psychologically impossible, it will be important for UNESCO to see that the eugenic problem is examined with the greatest care, and that the public mind is informed of the issues at stake, so that much that now is unthinkable may at least become thinkable. Huxley found the perfect front for the reintroduction of these unthinkable eugenical ideas in 1948, when he used UNESCO as a springboard for founding the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, and then again in 1961, when he used that agency as a springboard to create the World Wildlife Fund. Joining Huxley as co-founders of the fund were not only Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, founder of the Bilderberg Group and former employee of the IG Farben conglomerate, and Prince Philip of England, but Godfrey A. Rockefeller of the Rockefeller dynasty. Together, they pledged to harness public opinion and educate the world about the necessity for conservation. Years of education about the strain that the growing human population put on the resources of the Earth, paid for by the very oligarchs who had just spent the past century monopolizing one of the world's key resources, led, inevitably, to a predictable conclusion.
But the main finding was that stabilization of some kind is clearly desirable for the country.
Yes, we said that it is recognized that population cannot continue to grow indefinitely. Nobody questions that. And we said from our findings, we felt that now the nation should welcome and plan for a stabilized population.
With all the evidence that we've amassed in our preparations for the Stockholm Conference, including the views of many of the world's leading scientists, I am convinced that the prophets of doom have got to be taken seriously. In other words, doomsday is a possibility. I'm equally convinced that doomsday is not inevitable.
On paper, it would be almost impossible to find a less likely candidate for godfather of the modern environmental movement than Maurice Strong, a Rockefeller-connected millionaire from the Alberta oil patch who divided his time between environmental campaigning and running major oil companies. Organizer of the Stockholm Environmental Conference, founding director of the United Nations Environment Program, Secretary General of the Rio Earth Summit, founder of the Earth Council and the Earth Charter Movement, chair of the World Resources Institute, commissioner of the World Commission on Environment and Development, and board member of a bewildering array of organizations, from the International Institute for Sustainable Development to the Stockholm Environment Institute to the African American Institute. It was a Standard Oil veteran, Jack Gallagher, who gave Strong his big break in the Alberta oil patch when he quit his UN security job to return to Canada. And when Maurice Strong suddenly decided to quit that oil patch job, sell his house, and travel to Africa, he supported himself working for Rockefeller's Caltex in Nairobi. When he quit that job in 1954 and started his own company back in Canada, he hired Henry Bruni, a close friend of Rockefeller associate John J. McCloy, to manage it, and appointed 2 Standard Oil of New Jersey reps to its board. By his late 20s, he was running his own company and was already a millionaire.
you're in the next step of the post-old Soviet system. It's a world type of system where it's more advanced in the next step, where the top owners of all the producers, basically, of all the things that you consume, now have the right to work in governance. They're unelected, but have formed all their committees and so on to rule over the whole planet, to decide the fate of everybody and everything on the planet. Remember, all the talks they've given throughout many, many years on eugenics programs and the histories of the big players who run the world, basically. And they run all these charitable institutions on World Wildlife Fund and Prince Charles and Prince Philip and all these characters too. Because from their own talks, especially Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, you see that they're quite open about it. Their big meetings, it's all about depopulation. It's not because you're destroying the world, it's because they don't want you all around anymore. They really don't want you around anymore. Prince Philip has been so open about depopulating the peasant class, basically. And occasionally he's been chided for it, but nothing too serious, doesn't bother him. Why should it? He's untouchable. Julian Huxley was very open about eugenics. He was a member of the Society, a founding member of Planned Parenthood, very open about the world's system they could bring in and the need to cull back populations and unfit and all the rest of it. Very open about it all. Russell was more to the point, where he talked about war can bring them down. Releasing plagues like bubonic plague, actually mentioned that, would bring the population down and so on. But don't forget that all these big institutions have as their head different members of the royal family, who most certainly have never represented the average peasant of Britain. But they're very vocal about what has to be done. Now remember too that the Club of Rome was given, the big think tank was given the task of finding out a way so that the big boys could get their way over the general public, total control. You must have a serious scenario given, and they dreamed up global warming, famine, pestilence, drought, and the like, the old plague type of stuff. That would do it. That would fit the bill, so that man would be the enemy, and that's why they're calling it anthropogenic global warming. It was dreamed up by a think tank that published that very thing I've just said. So it's not speculation on my part. And this is where we're going with it all. To understand, this is the new religion, and under the guise of saving the world, they're going to go the whole way with deciding who lives, dies. They already are. Now they're going with the older people and so on. They've quite openly discussed, well, why keep them alive, even though it's no big deal or massive expense. They keep them alive with minor illnesses, but now they want to get rid of them quite openly. They come out with it more and more openly, and you're going to see it escalate. You start with the children, you abort them. We've already had some. You should look into yourselves, and I know way more about it than I say. But they have some surgeons and abortionists even talking about aborting them up to even after they're born, up to the age of 3. In official journals, medical journals, things like that. These characters are serious about it, and we better get through our heads. These people mean business, and they will use all techniques. And I think they're already using many of the techniques of depopulation right now. The Western world is going sterile, you know that too. Too many articles out there over many years that I've read myself to deny them. A booming business now is fertility clinics, because you are living with the techniques that were perfected under the communist socialist system, which also brought forth, by the way, psychology and psychiatry and behaviorism. That was all part of it. Even the early proponents and founders of behaviorism said that the ultimate goal of it was for human control over humans, behaviorism. And Freud said similar things too. These people were actually revolutionaries, part of a world revolutionary movement, for those who didn't know it. And from the earliest days of even the Fabian Society and the George Bernard Shaws and so on, and H.G. Wells, who worked for it too, They were quite blatant about the fact that the working people, so much of their problem was simply there's just too many of them. That's never changed. And getting back to eugenics, that's why you have this whole idea of global warming. Now it's climate change because they can't keep the warming going, especially when you're freezing to death. But facts don't matter. It's to give themselves control over everything you do and how you live and if you'll even breed in the future. That's what it's about. Total control. How else can they get you to give up bit by bit by bit all your rights till you're managed by a massive, massive bureaucracy across the planet?
Now, one of the various books I have was taken from the Royal Institute of International Affairs World Meeting, one of their world meetings. This particular one, the topic was the British Commonwealth and the future. It was published by Humphrey Milford, and this was 1938. I think the meeting was in 37. In this book, it says on page 258, it's under the title A World Order. Several delegates, more especially from the left political wing, urged that no world order could be built save on a better social order. A world order, said one, implies a rule of justice, internal as well as international, social as well as political. He then went on to espouse the fact they would use the labour standards of Britain to bring the working people on board, basically, to cooperate towards this order. And just above this on the same page, 258, it states here, more than one delegate remarked that once the Commonwealth basis was achieved, there was no reason why the control should not be international, and many reasons why it should, and the members of the conference were brought back to their conceptions of a world order by the question, how can you get international control without international government? Well, you see, they knew, oh yeah, ultimately it would evolve into international government. In page 278, he goes on to say, the Commonwealth order, we may surmise, is only a path to a world order. The conference discussion suggested that this gradual assimilation might happen in the economic as well as the political sphere, where the Commonwealth would then continue or pass away as having fulfilled its usefulness would be for some British Commonwealth Relations Conference of the future to discuss. This was based as well, remember, the Council on Foreign Relations and the Royal Institute of International Affairs, on another group which had been born in the 1800s, the Cecil Rhodes Society and Foundation, given a royal charter to exist because they were in effect a front group, technically non-governmental, so they could get away with doing a lot in the world without governments being blamed as backing them. Lord Milner, Alfred Milner, joined the Round Table Societies with the Rhodes Foundation, and this made the nucleus for the League of Nations, which is the United Nations, and you still have the Round Table Societies working on different problems like think tanks do, on how to make us all interdependent. Down at the bottom of the page 223, it says, a fifth Canadian speaker mentioned this, he could conceive a situation arising in which a dominion might be involved in a war without involving other parts. For instance, a conflict between Japan and the United States, in which Canada might be involved. Remember, this was before World War II, before Pearl Harbor. In page 221, it says, this conception of the Commonwealth as the nucleus of a system of world government was discussed from various angles, both in the session of that morning and at the two subsequent meetings of the Commission. So there you are. You see, the British Commonwealth was to be the nucleus of a world government. They created the League of Nations, transforming into the United Nations. And remember that every major media mogul on the planet attended this particular and other meetings that they have, because they are your propagandists to train people intergenerationally towards global government. Their global government. Now, a lot of people, I'm sure, will see this as quite a natural development and a thing to work towards if they believe the real reasons are wars that are, as are given when the history books, were caused by the reasons they tell you. But really, you're looking at the top tycoons on the planet whose beginnings go back to the old knights when they looted countries, and then they created corporations like the British East India Company, who set up all of this. So they get all the true believers working for them towards global government, when they will have a little twist in the tail towards the end of it for the real reason.